Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am not John Hamre. I'm Kathleen Hicks. I direct the International Security Program here at CSIS, and our CEO, Dr. John Hamre, was called away unexpectedly this afternoon, and he very much regrets not being here. But I have the great honor, as a result, of being able to introduce on behalf of CSIS our speaker today, who's the NASA Administrator, Charlie Bolden. Administrator Bolden has overseen an incredible transformation, really, at a pivotal time for NASA, really extending them much more into space and aeronautical technology development, the commercial sector, and of course the greening, if you will, the improvements to aeronautical technology. In addition, he, of course, had a prior 34-year career with the Marine Corps, including 14 as a member of NASA's astronaut office. He has traveled to orbit 4 times. That's 4 times more than probably most of us in the room. Aboard the space shuttle between 1986 and 1994. He commanded 2 of those missions, and he piloted 2 of those missions. Before we begin, I also have a responsibility as your safety officer to just remind you that there are exits behind me and exits behind all of you. Should a fire alarm or something like that go off, you should follow me to the appropriate exit, and we have both a church and a bar separately across the street, so depending on the circumstances, we'll find ourselves at one or the other. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Administrator Bolden.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hicks, for the very kind introduction, and let me thank all of you for allowing me to come over and spend some time with you. Even though he's not here, I'd ask any of you who see Dr. Hamre, please thank him for me for extending the invitation or accepting my plea to come over and spend a little time with you. We've been looking forward to this for quite some time, and I have a whole team of people here on the front row, so that in the interest of full disclosure, if anybody starts cheering or jeering over on this front row, you'll know that it's not any of you being rude. It's a lot of NASA folk that are trying to fill up the room. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here. Also, I want to introduce another person who's back there in the back. Yes, I'm going to introduce my son. There are 2 people of whom I am, well, that's my son, Colonel Che Bolden. He's presently at Brookings as a fellow. He's an active duty Marine, a colonel, what we call a WISO in the Marine Corps, a weapons and sensor operator, a man soon to be without a job since we're transitioning to the single seat F-35, and we can talk about that a little bit later. Dr. Harrison came over and I listened to him talk about it once before, but that's not a part of my talk. It's really great to be here with all of you at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and you know, one of the things that I appreciate about this organization is that you recognize that the relationship between space exploration, innovation, job creation, and a safer, more secure nation. I will interrupt here to say I have 2 rules, and one rule the center won't appreciate, because if you're like me, like I'm getting now, I can't remember a question that I want to ask. So if you have a burning question, just raise your hand and ask your question. And I know that violates the rules, but that way you can get your question out, and I can. My mother, who was a librarian, Che's grandmother, taught me how to read along and put my finger somewhere. So if you raise a question, I can still get back to my paper, and maybe the question will be so good that we'll talk about that the rest of the day until they pull me off and sit me over here in a chair with Todd to talk about other questions. You know, after I spent 3.5 decades of serving our nation in the United States Marine Corps, I really appreciate the important voice you have in our nation's defense and security policy. You existed when I was in the Marine Corps, but I was not very conversant or knowledgeable about the work that you did. And now that I have gone through that time, I've had an opportunity to come back to Washington at NASA for the last almost 7 years now. I have really come to appreciate the incredible influence, to be quite honest, that think tanks, organizations like yours have on the national thought. And what is most important is that in today's world where there's very little public dialogue about really critical subjects, this forum provides a very rare opportunity for us to talk about our nation's space program, our nation's civil space program, which I think is absolutely critical, and about which I think very few people know anything at all. So thanks again for the invite. As the administrator of NASA, I appreciate your voice on issues ranging from space policy to technology to energy to climate change, or as I like to call it, because I don't like the term climate change, it's too controversial, I use the term changing climate. That is one thing about which no one can argue. The other terms they tend to make people want to argue about stuff. But I just tell people, look outside, today, for example. The climate is always changing, and so we need to decide, are we an influence or what? As a fellow American, I greatly admire your work to ensure that America remains a force for good in the world, using soft or smart power to advance domestic principles and policies. We share this aspiration at NASA, where our mission statement calls upon us to reach for new heights to benefit of all humankind. I think President Obama said it best when he said, and I quote, "We will not only extend humanity's reach into space, we will strengthen America's leadership here on Earth," unquote. This duality of purpose is mutually reinforcing, and it is what I want to talk to you about for a little bit of time today. In a relatively short period of time, the space program has not only expanded humanity's reach and knowledge about our universe, it has revolutionized the way we practice medicine, insulate our houses, and purify our drinking water. It has not only planted the American flag on the moon, it has impacted how we plant and raise crops. It has not only sent us stunning pictures of places like Mars and Pluto, it beamed nightly television into our homes and improves the eyeglasses many of us like me wear. NASA technology has not only brought us closer to Mars, it's also brought us closer to one another. When we go to visit loved ones, we drive on highways that are safer because of NASA technologies, or we travel on airplanes that fly safer, cleaner, and quieter because every American aircraft and every air traffic control tower is equipped with NASA technology. Our technology has also brought us closer to our neighbors throughout the globe, allowing us to exercise smart or soft power through both our humanitarian work and our work to provide developing space programs with assistance as they seek to lift off. By the way, despite the popular misconception, we can't claim credit for Velcro or Tang. Not sure what Buzz had on the moon. If he had either Velcro or Tang, we didn't invent it, so somebody else invented it for him. A poet once said, and I quote, "The universe is made of stories," unquote. With this in mind, I have a story I'd like to share with you this afternoon. So if you want, you can close your eyes. Just imagine, if you will, with me, because it's a story about a great country, the greatest country on earth, that has always aspired to do very, very big things. So, you can pretend it's a true story, it's a science fiction story, it's a novel. You make it whatever you want to make it, but I'm going to tell you this story. In the story, this great nation, for half a century, her presidents, planetary scientists, pilots, and poets alike dreamed of sending her astronauts to Mars. In all honesty, they were not alone. If you think about it, for as long as humanity has known about Mars, human beings in all corners of our globe have dreamed of one day setting foot on the red planet. However, at the dawn of the 21st century, getting to Mars was no more than a distant horizon goal. There was no realistic or sustainable plan in place for getting there. There was no timetable. There was nothing close to a consensus on Mars as a destination even. Yet the people of this country's space agency never stopped dreaming. Over half a century, the people of this country had achieved some brilliant, amazing things, including a reusable spacecraft with the beauty of an airplane, actually the world's largest glider, and the capacity to carry 8 astronauts to space with a 16-foot payload bay. But on February 1st, 2003, tragedy struck, and they lost a space shuttle called Columbia, along with the heroes, 6 of their own countrywomen and men, and 1 from an allied nation. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board in this story gave things a long, hard look and recommended that the shuttle program be phased out. Many in the space community, and I must say, including the person who's talking to you right now, all agreed with this recommendation. For you see, every technology evolves over time, and it was time to focus on reaching further into deep space. Their president at the time, a man by the name of George W. Bush, agreed, and he directed the phase-out of the shuttle program. Fast forward to 2009. A new president named Barack Obama takes office, and he asked an independent committee chaired by former Lockheed CEO Norm Augustine to review the nation's plans for human spaceflight. The committee includes astronauts, scientists, executives, educators, engineers, a retired Air Force general, people as distinguished as the late Dr. Sally Ride. Their findings, quite frankly, are sobering, and I quote, "The U.S. human spaceflight program appears to be on an unsustainable trajectory," unquote. So you can begin to see who this nation is in this maybe fictitious story. It gives me no joy to recall these words personally, but it's an important benchmark of how far all of us have come since that time. Determined to replace an unsustainable trajectory with a clear, financially stable, and ambitious way forward, in 2010, this new president comes to this nation's great spaceport, the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida, and issues the people of his space agency 2 challenges. Send our astronauts to an asteroid by 2025, and we can talk more about that later, and to Mars in the 2030s, and do so in a way that strengthens our economy, our environment, and our understanding of the universe, our place in it, and the most important planet of them all, Earth. As you've hopefully guessed by now, as I alluded and as I just told you, this country, this great country, is our country, and it's our country today. What's more, this is our story. This is my story. This is your story. Because NASA's journey to Mars was never designed just about NASA. It's a journey we will take together with partners in industry, academia, nonprofits, and other space agencies across our ever-shrinking planet. Given your focus here at CSIS, I'm going to spend the balance of my time talking about this last group, our international partners. But first, I want to say a quick word about how we're working with industry to create and strengthen commercial space markets, especially since there are a number of companies that play in both the civil and military arena. President Obama asked NASA to work simultaneously with industry partners both in low Earth orbit and in deep space, and that's exactly what we've done. We're working with commercial carriers so that the greatest country in the world can launch cargo and crew from our own soil to the International Space Station. Today, our commercial partners have delivered tens of thousands of pounds of cargo to the station. Furthermore, we're poised to end our sole reliance on Russia to get our astronauts to space. Our American commercial partners, Boeing and SpaceX, are close to being ready to take our astronauts to the International Space Station, allowing NASA to support job creation right here in the good old US of A. From day one, the President's strategy was to use these initiatives to build a commercial space market in low Earth orbit, strengthening America's economic competitiveness in the global innovation economy, and strengthening communities throughout our country by putting Americans to work. Today, our neighbors are working across more than 1,000 companies in nearly every state of the U.S. in support of NASA's commercial space initiatives. When it comes to deep space, the President asked us to work with American entrepreneurs, innovators, and inventors on developing the technologies that drive exploration and job creation. These would come to be technologies like habitats, 3D printers, space veggies, medical devices, propulsion systems, and so forth. Technologies that astronauts will use to one day live and work on Mars and safely return home. Technologies that have a lot of potential spin-off benefits here on Earth. Moving on to international partnerships. Neil Armstrong and his truly, Buzz Aldrin, who is sitting right here on the first row, famously put a plaque on the moon that read, "We came in peace for all mankind," unquote. While they took their giant leaps for all humankind, the United States had conducted this mission essentially on its own. This will not be the case when American astronauts reach Mars in the 2030s. It does not make sense for one country to build every instrument, launch every satellite, or conduct every research experiment, even if it were possible. We have over 50 years and more than 4,000 agreements to build upon. The principles of our agency come from the principles of our democracy. Things like free and open access to scientific data, free markets and competition, and meritocracy. For instance, any American can work for NASA if they have demonstrated that they have the right stuff. Our most recent astronaut class is the first ever to have an equal number of women and men. Of 6,800 applicants for the class of 2013, we picked 8. 8 out of 6,800. 4 men, 4 women. And I can tell you from having personally interacted with them for the last few years now, they are absolutely mind-boggling. They are incredible. For the next class, the one that we're in the process of evaluating and trying to select now, the class of 2017, more than 18,000 Americans applied to be astronauts. And I, for one, cannot wait to see what the class will look like. 18,000. That's more than we had ever received for anything anybody had ever thought of in NASA and probably in a lot of other organizations. When it comes to global leadership, we lead both by example and by action. Sometimes our most significant giant steps occur right here on Earth, where NASA's technologies are being used to put America's best foot forward. Together with international partners, U.S. industry, entrepreneurs, and academia, we at NASA are advancing American smart or soft power. For example, technologies we designed to detect signs of life on Mars are also being used to allow emergency workers on our own planet listen for beating hearts in the rubble after a disaster. It is something that is commercially available called Finder. Technologies we developed to recycle wastewater aboard the International Space Station are being put to use to provide our global neighbors in remote areas of Asia, South and Central America with clean drinking water, not to mention some rural areas of our own country here in America. Medical diagnosis tools that astronauts use in space are now being adapted to save lives of people living in places where CT scans, MRIs, and even simple X-rays are not accessible. Best example of that would be the portable ultrasound that we use on board station where astronauts can routinely do an ultrasound on themselves. The data goes right away down to the ground to the flight surgeon and mission control in Houston. They can evaluate any kind of ailment the astronaut may wonder if they have. That same portable device that's about the size of a receiver on a regular telephone in your house has now been transferred into the public sector, and there are companies. We help train midwives in remote areas of the world who can now, with an expectant mother, use the portable ultrasound device to monitor the health of a fetus. A doctor 200, 300 kilometers away can look and say everything's okay, or can tell the midwife and the mother that it's time to get her to a hospital or a technical medical facility, or whether they can continue to handle whatever it is out in the rural area. When it comes to space itself, I can't say enough about the diplomatic benefits of the International Space Station. Today, a child who is 15 years old or younger has lived every day of his or her life while human beings from multiple countries are living and working together in space aboard the International Space Station. And that kind of oversimplifies it. A child that is 15 years or younger, for example, my oldest granddaughter, his oldest daughter, is 16, just turned 16 in March. McKaylee has not lived a single day, not a single second of her life when there have not been at least a Russian and an American living and working on the International Space Station 24/7, just doing things to try to make life better for us back here on Earth. Tens of thousands of people from across 15 countries have been involved in its operation. Astronauts from 17 countries have spent time on board. It has hosted more than 1,700 research investigations from researchers in more than 83 countries. I truly believe, and I say this frequently, I truly believe it ought to be considered for the Nobel Peace Prize. What's more recently, American astronaut Scott Kelly and Russian cosmonaut Mikhail Kornienko each spent a year together in space aboard the station. This at a time when sometimes the relationship between their two home countries back here on Earth presented incredible challenges. I'll give you one story, and it was Al Condis, who's down there on the second row. He and I were in Moscow recently for the welcome ceremony for Scott and Mikhail after they had come back from their year in space, and they do things in a much bigger manner over in Russia to celebrate the homecoming of their cosmonauts. A lot of ceremony, a lot of pomp, and it's tradition, and people come from all around to be a part of this. And so we went through that with Mikhail and Scott, and Scott was scheduled to meet with Secretary Kerry. It just so happened that Secretary Kerry had made a trip to Moscow, so we were there at the same time. And he and I met on the morning that he was supposed to meet with Scott, and we carried on a conversation. First question he asked, he looked at Al and me and he said, "How do you guys do it?" And I said, "Do what?" He said, "How do you manage to have this incredible relationship for such a long period of time now when we're not doing well otherwise?" And I said, I don't know, Mr. Secretary, but I think we have a common mission. You know, when you look at Roscosmos, when you look at our other International Space Station partners, we all share a common vision, a common mission, and actually we all are trying to make the world better. We're trying to make it better, safer for humanity. And that may be the thing that makes it so important. Later that day, we found out that when Scott came in to visit with Secretary Kerry, Secretary Kerry found out, and the ambassador there found out that Mikhail was in the car. He was waiting downstairs because he didn't think it would be appropriate to bring him up to meet with the U.S. Secretary of State. And Secretary Kerry and the U.S. ambassador said, "Whose idea was that? Get him up here." So they brought him up, and Secretary Kerry, instead of just meeting with Scott Kelly, met with Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko. And they carried on a long conversation about the mission, about the things that they were doing, about the future of our two countries, and it was all over the Russian press. And I think our international relations folk will tell you, for some reason, for several weeks now since that trip, the press accounts of the U.S.-Russian relationship in space has just enjoyed an incredible positive upswing. So if you don't see anything at all good in the Russian press lately, it's been about the goodness of the U.S.-Russian program, Roscosmos and NASA, on the International Space Station. So that's what I refer to as soft power, and I think that's what we bring to the table in spades. President Obama and Congress have twice now extended the life of the International Space Station, now through at least 2024. As we look forward to the future, the question we will need to answer is how to keep the momentum going. How will we assemble equally durable and productive coalitions in the future? As the next decade begins anew, the future could potentially bring new partners, be they countries and/or commercial partners, as well as new goals. The fact of the matter is, our world is changing. Traditional space partners are expanding their efforts in low Earth orbit and the regions beyond. Meanwhile, the ability to utilize space has dramatically shifted to include dozens of developed and developing nations, large and small companies, and even private entrepreneurs. In the last 10 years, new spacefaring nations gained experience building satellites and developing applications from their data. Over the past few years, as NASA has expanded its global reach to emerging spacefaring nations, our international partnerships have grown in scope, importance, and diversity. As the number of actors benefiting from space rises, the pool of stakeholders expands, creating a powerful source of stability as norms regarding long-term sustainability of outer space become more widely shared. I'm not the first person to point out that space is on the verge of becoming more contested, congested, and competitive. Needless to say, this phenomena will continue to bring with it new challenges, challenges like orbital traffic management and debris mitigation. Anyone who is following space policy on the international scene will nod in agreement when I say that as a world community, we've yet to find a consensus on a set of guidelines for the long-term sustainability of the space environment, although we are committed to that end. Nonetheless, the positive benefits of space cooperation and the undeniable leadership of the United States in pushing space exploration beyond the boundaries are powerful incentives for the nations to become good, responsible actors and partners in the space domain. While all of this is as yet undetermined, I frequently meet with senior leaders from around the world, and time and again, they will tell me that they're looking to the United States to set the course, and they will follow our lead. At NASA, we intend to provide that leadership in space exploration, while seeking opportunities for mutually beneficial cooperation. I have occasion to meet with the heads of space agencies from all over the world, including just recently in Colorado Springs at the Space Symposium. Time and again, they tell me that they're looking for the United States to set the course, and they will follow our lead. We're no longer in a space race against each other. Rather, we're traveling together as a human race that's looking to expand the outer bounds of human possibility and progress. All told, at NASA, we have roughly 700 active international agreements with more than 120 international partners. One of the things that NASA is doing today is talking to and working with nations that are just beginning to understand how space activities might have a profound benefit on their citizens' daily lives. And incidentally, this has diplomatic as well as scientific value. Working initially in the areas of scientific research, education, and earth science applications, NASA is in the process of expanding its global reach in a manner that will establish relationships able to endure far into the future. I spoke earlier about the International Space Station. This is one of many examples where we are already working together with other countries and have the potential to include new participants from other nations. Let me be specific. When it comes to earth science satellites, over half of NASA's operating missions include significant international involvement. Additionally, the United States, along with Europe, China, Japan, India, and other partners are already sharing Earth observation data, creating a constellation of satellites that operate as part of an overall Earth observation system. Today, people from all walks of life are using this data to change and perhaps even save our planet. They're working on farms and in classrooms, labs, hospitals, boardrooms, and garages across our world to improve the efficacy of agriculture and education, to detect outbreaks of disease and forest fires, and to study our planet's changing climate. Final point, if you look at all we've accomplished over these past 6 years, and if you consider that we are closer today to sending human beings to Mars than anyone, anywhere, at any time has ever been, it's very clear to me that President Obama has set us on a visionary course. It's my sincere hope that future leaders from all sides of the political spectrum will see it through. Because when I close my eyes and imagine the future that my generation will be leaving to my beautiful grandchildren, if we choose to stay the course, I see a pathway to boundless progress, progress that reaches all the way to Mars and beyond. I see a future where my grandchildren's children will be accustomed to human beings living and working on Mars, a future where NASA and its international partners are using Mars as a stepping stone to the rest of the solar system. I see a future where a robust commercial space market is fueling innovation and job creation alike, and where these innovations have spin-off benefits for our national security, our quality of life and economy, a future where we are able to launch human beings, cargo, and satellites of all sizes to space at a significantly lower price point, thanks to the work we're doing today to make launches more affordable and to advance emerging small satellite technologies like CubeSats and nanosats. I see a future where our grandchildren's children are drinking cleaner water, breathing cleaner air, and making use of cleaner energy. I see a world where girls and young people of color are more excited about pursuing education in science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. I see a future where people in even the most remote corners of our world have access to Wi-Fi, as do astronauts living and working in space. I see a future where maybe, just maybe, humanity finds the answer to the age-old question of whether we're alone in the universe. Last but not least, I see a world where our grandchildren live in greater security, thanks to American leadership, thanks to technology, and thanks to humanity's achievement. As the late President John F. Kennedy expressed in his view of the future in which nations live together in peace, I quote, "The kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables people and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children, not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time," unquote. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for joining us here at CSIS. I'm Todd Harrison. I'm a senior fellow here in the International Security Program. It's a real pleasure to have you with us to talk about such important topics. I wanted to start out, we're going to do Q&A with the audience in just a minute, but I wanted to start out, I get to take the moderator's prerogative and ask a few questions of my own. So you spoke some about the relationship with the U.S. and Russia. Of course, that has deteriorated our overall relationship between the two countries in recent years. But the ISS partnership has endured. And, you know, as you mentioned, we're focused on the mission there. And there's a mutual dependence among the U.S. and Russia. For people who aren't following it closely, we need them to ferry astronauts to and from the station. They need us to operate the station. So we can't do it without one another. So has that mutual dependence on the ISS, in your opinion, do you think that has served as a stabilizing role in overall U.S.-Russian relations, or could it be a potentially destabilizing factor?
I think without question, it's been an extremely stabilizing, it has had a stabilizing effect. When you talk to President Obama, or since I don't get to talk to President Putin, but I do talk with my colleagues, my counterpart is Igor Komarov, who does talk to President Putin with great frequency. And the message we hear from both leaders of both nations is their belief that in the critical importance of the International Space Station, you know, as an implementation facility for this soft power, world cooperation and the like. And it's not just those two leaders. Many other nations in the world, Germany as a member of the International Space Station Coalition, as a member of the European Space Agency, and other nations have all talked about the critical importance of stations. So I think it's had a definite stabilizing influence.
Okay. You also talked about the security environment in space, and so I wanted to pick up on that for a minute. So China has made a lot of advances in its space technologies and their space programs in recent years, and they appear to have ambitions to go even further out in space, perhaps missions to the moon or beyond. They've also made some real advances in their military space capabilities and some of their counter space capabilities. You know, we all know about the anti-satellite tests in 2007, and they've had some subsequent tests since then, and all of the debris that has been produced from that, some of which is a problem for the International Space Station. The military has increasingly started to view China as not just a competitor, but a threat in space. So what is NASA's perspective? Is China a threat or a potential partner when it comes to civil space exploration?
I'm glad you added that last part. Since I only deal with civil space, right. I see them as a potential partner down the road. As I mentioned in my remarks, they are already a partner in some areas, such as earth science. We're working cooperatively with the Chinese Academy of Science in glacial characterization in the Himalayas, looking at geodetics or the causes of earthquakes and the like. We've done some work with them in lunar science, in trying to help them with their Chandrayaan that was landed on the moon with Jade Rabbit, the rover. So there are potential areas of partnership there, but because of congressional restrictions right now, we're limited to mainly multilateral activities with them. You mentioned one of the things we find is that if we can talk to a partner, or if we can talk to another nation that may be a potential partner, then it is more likely that we're going to be able to avoid some of the undesired things that can come up. Having spent 34 years in the Marine Corps, I can't think of a nation that we haven't at least talked to. Mm-hmm. We talk to some pretty bad people from time to time because we have to. And we frequently find that in conversation with those really bad people, sometimes they come around, sometimes they don't. But I think if you talk to anybody in the military, most of them will tell you that engagement always beats isolation. Engagement always beats trying to do things on your own. And the story of what we're attempting to do today, when you talk about any threat to the United States, is generally engagement with allies and adversaries, because there's generally some common mission or some common goal that you can pursue together, even if you don't talk to each other on a routine basis with other things.
Okay. Well, and there's historical comparisons have been made to how we cooperated with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Even in the 1970s, the Apollo-Soyuz test project, we were doing human missions with the Soviet Union. Even while we were not cooperating in a lot of other areas. And another similarity is that at that time, the Russian space programs, their military and civil programs were commingled. And so we didn't have a lot of insight, except when we cooperated in civil programs. Then we did get some insight. The Chinese today, they also seem to commingle their military and civil space programs. I think we're one of the exceptions out there that we make a clear division between military and civil. So do you think those parallels are valid about whether or not we should cooperate with China in the future? And do you think that there could be similar benefits to cooperating with China in civil space now like there were?
I think the Soviet-American relationship in space at the height of the Cold War, beginning with Apollo-Soyuz, and then expanding after the fall of the Berlin Wall to my last flight on the space shuttle, which was the first flight of a Russian cosmonaut on the U.S. space shuttle. The beginning, it was considered to be what we call Phase A of the shuttle Mir program, where we started sending, I want to say, 4 American astronauts to Mir, to the Russian space station Mir, for long-duration flights. And that gave us the confidence. Those were what we call confidence-building maneuvers or confidence-building activities that allowed us to have enough confidence in our ability to gain the trust of the Russians and them to trust us that we could collaboratively go into a partnership on something as incredibly complex and difficult as the construction of the International Space Station. And if you remember, in fact, Al Conda sitting back there remembers all of it very well because he was pretty much a part of the team from day one. It was President Clinton who, as a last-minute decision, told us to take this International Space Station team that was already formed and did not include Russia, and bring Russia into the family after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And there were a lot of geopolitical reasons to do that. And so those things are critically important even today. And so I think the Soviet-American example of Apollo-Soyuz is perfect for where we are today with China or other emerging nations that, that may have the potential to become a partner in space.
Okay, and you talked a little bit about norms in the space domain, and from a national security perspective, that's one of the real challenges we see in the future. The 3 C's, contested, congested, and competitive. But there don't seem to be many norms that people respect in the space domain. It's kind of like the Wild West. What can NASA's role be in helping set norms, leading by example to get other countries to accept and start to follow the same set of norms?
There's some things that the U.S. cannot do. It's just because unilaterally everybody doesn't flock to us and say, okay, we want to do what you say. There are international forums, the UN is one, and a lot of people complain, but we participate very actively in a forum at the UN called UN COPUOS, the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And it is in that international forum where the UN can bring together all nations, all spacefaring nations, and try to promote norms of operation, whether it's use of weapons in space, whether it's orbital debris, not just mitigation, which all of us are involved in. We make rules to try to help mitigate the growing population of debris in low Earth orbit. But nobody today is actively working on a serious plan to remove orbital debris, to lessen the threat from debris in low Earth orbit. It's happening in the UN and UN COPUOS. And so they act as an international body, an international forum for all of us to come together where nobody has to believe that, okay, the U.S. is trying to dictate something. The U.S. is a member just like everyone else. In the area of aeronautics, we participate. We were one of the founding nations, but we participate in something called the International Forum on Aeronautical Research. That now has 25 nations, which includes China, Russia, you name it. And they are nations of the world who have come together in spite of any adversarial relationship they may otherwise have in looking at aviation safety, looking at air traffic management and the like. And so we have helped to grow that international organization because we feel it's better for humanity. It's better for everybody if we all work on a common issue that is of concern no matter which country you go to, which is safe air travel.
All right.
Don't catch whatever it is that's going around.
I already caught it.
Oh, man.
So looking forward, you talked about Mars. When are we going to get to Mars? What's the timeline now?
2030s.
2030s?
Good. As I said before, there was no plan, and some people today even contest our plan, but we have one. And a plan at least has to have a definite date in which you're going to do something. Yeah. So, because the president said so, for one thing, and because when we did the technical assessments and everything, we believe we have the technological wherewithal. We understand enough about the human body and its ability to survive in a hostile environment of space, deep space. We understand the radiation environment well enough. We don't fully understand it, but we understand it well enough to believe that it is worth the risk to put humans in that environment for periods of time. And that tells us that we think we can be in the Martian environment in the 2030s. So if you look at the plan, we divide the world in time into 3 pieces today. Earth reliant, which is where we are today and have been for about 50 years now. Operating in low Earth orbit, dominantly on the International Space Station for the last 15 plus years. In the decade of the 20s, so about 4 years from now, 3 to 4 years from now, we're going to migrate out of low Earth orbit. There will still be a vibrant, sustained environment here for us to operate from. That's where the commercial entities really come in, because the intent and the proposal of President Obama was you equip commercial sector, whether it's international or otherwise, to be able to take over access to low Earth orbit. We've done that. So we don't carry cargo to space anymore. NASA doesn't. We contract for the service. We pay SpaceX. We pay a company called Orbital ATK. We just recently contracted with another company called Sierra Nevada that will begin flying cargo in 2018, 2019. So we've done our part to facilitate the success of that low Earth orbit capability. We now are about to move government entities along with us to another area around the moon. We're going back around the moon for the decade of the 20s in an area, in a region or a time that we call the proving ground. So for the decade of the 20s, we're going to be operating with our partners, international, entrepreneurial, industrial, academic, in orbiting the moon, in helping people to get to the surface of the moon, whether it's robotic or with humans. And my hope is that some of the people who said they want to go to the surface of the moon, whether it's other countries, or the entrepreneurs that said, get NASA out of the way and we'll go do it, we're ready to facilitate their success in living up to that promise. Nobody's stepped forward yet, but we're waiting. Then, at the end of that 10-year period of time, we'll feel confident enough that the toilet will work for 3 years. We'll know how to manufacture or produce food in an environment where you're not, you can't get it from farmers and there's no supply train coming or no supply cargo ship or any of that. So we've got to be able to make our own food, and we're doing that aboard the International Space Station right now. So we'll be ready to move out in the 2030s with humans going into what's the final phase called the Earth independent phase. We use that term because when you get out there, you're 8 months, with today's technology, you're 8 months away from being reached by anybody from Earth. Emergency comes up, it's 8 months. I don't care how serious the emergency is, we don't have the capability to get there any quicker right now, but we're working on game-changing propulsion that will speed that journey up. So those are the 3 phases. We're in Earth-reliant, moving to proving ground, and then ultimately to Earth-independent.
Okay. And so I want to open it up for questions from the audience. A lot of hands going up here. We'll start with the lady in the front row here.
Thank you so much. My name is Xue Jiao from China Central Television. Last year you mentioned ban on Chinese partnership is temporary. So my question is, how long is temporary? Do you have a timetable, or are you still optimistic?
How long is temporary?
I mean, the thing is...
Temporary, that's
do
a
you
great
think that time will be shortened, or are you still optimistic about US-China?
I am very optimistic. I am not so optimistic that I think it will happen the kind of cooperation that I envision and that I had hoped to instill, and that President Obama had hoped we could do when I went to China in 2010. I've run out of time, so there's not enough time in my remaining period of time as the NASA administrator to have it happen now. But there's no reason that, given continuous negotiations with Congress and continuous discussion with our other international partners, that you couldn't have a viable, functioning bilateral relationship with China in the next administration. But again, it goes back to what I said. It depends on what decision. We have choices to make. I say that a lot. We can choose to just say we don't want to grow that relationship and continue to go down that road. And what I think will happen is that our international partners who don't agree with us on that and have chosen already to work with China. So we're one of the few nations involved on the International Space Station that doesn't deal with China on a bilateral basis in discussions about human spaceflight, for example.
Okay, another question back here.
Hi there, Administrator Bolden. I had the great honor of seeing you with your STS-60 partner, Sergei Konstantinovich Krikalev, last week. It was a true honor. I have a question to you about NASA. I applaud your efforts to collaborate with your Russian counterparts on human spaceflight, particularly with the ISS and launch capabilities. However, this type of mutually beneficial cooperation is not replicated to other NASA missions and to the United States scientific and industrial complex as a whole. So, my question is, would you recommend that the United States pursue a broader initiative and policy to collaborate with Russia, considering all of the benefits that you talked about earlier, and that together we can make a better place?
I'm going to defer that or refer that question to the State Department. I mean, we could have a personal conversation, but that's not, I think that's out of the purview or the responsibility of the NASA administrator. I'd rather leave diplomatic issues to the State Department.
All right. Question up front here. Bring a mic.
Hello, General. Kevin Winsling, retired Navy. Good to see you again. I wanted to, congratulate NASA on the Space and Engineering, Science and Engineering Fair. You had a great presence there. 2 questions. One on sort of commercial tourism in space and Bigelow and some of these companies that are getting involved a little more on the space tourism. And then also on STEM education and what NASA is doing to help grow the next generation of engineers.
I tell people all the time, let me answer the second question first about STEM education. If you look at our budget, sometimes people get upset because we have our budget for STEM education, the Office of Education is about $100 million, which is, that's peanuts. You can't even find that. It's not even a rounding error, you know, so it's essentially nothing. But we have a $19.3 billion budget, and at NASA we dedicate $19.3 billion to STEM education. Because every program we do, I mean, you know, downlinks from the International Space Station into classrooms around the world, that's not paid for by the Office of Education. That is something that we do in human spaceflight because we feel it's important. And we want to be able to have our astronauts and our partner astronauts share with the students back in their own country. So we beam signals down every single day, multiple times a day, all around the world, not just to American schools. So we find ways to promote and support STEM education with every single one of those $19.3 billion that we have. We'd love to have more money in the Office of Education so we can focus some of those efforts to go into classrooms to assist teachers in developing curriculum and doing things like that. The second question was about the commercial entities. They're vital, absolutely vital. What I would like to see is more progress in the field in the area of tourism, but like anything dealing with space is hard. We had an unfortunate accident on the part of Virgin Galactic. That set them back a little bit, but I fully expect that they will probably fly maybe this year, and then maybe next year they'll actually start flying some of the quote-unquote customers that they have. When we facilitated, and I always use the term facilitated. NASA is not making or creating a commercial space industry. We can't do that. We're a government entity. Commercial to me means commercial. You know, it means non-government, not subsidized, and the like. So it's up to American industry to create this business, if you will. But we have facilitated their potential success by contributing, by donating, or by joining forces with them, by investing in what they do. And that's the way we started with SpaceX. That's the way we did it with Orbital ATK. That's the way we've done it with Boeing. It doesn't make any difference the size of the company or the size of the entrepreneurial activity. We decide what level of investment we want to make and then sit back and kind of help them with what we know to develop that. So it was the intent as we helped to develop commercial space capability for people, SpaceX Dragon, Crew Dragon, and the Boeing CST-100. Our full expectation is that at some point down the road, and for us, sooner is better, they will lend us or rent us or do whatever, lease to us a spacecraft to use for 6 months to get a crew to the International Space Station. When we bring that vehicle back and give it back to them, because they're a reusable spacecraft, it would be, my expectation would be that, okay, before that vehicle flies for me one more time, they're going to fly a few flights with tourists, and they're going to let their pilots launch out of Cape Canaveral or wherever they launch from, and they're going to take people up to look at the world from the vantage point that is mind-boggling for a day or maybe half a day or something like that. That was a part of the model. And when you talk to people about business cases, that's an integral part of the business case that allowed companies like Boeing and SpaceX to get into this business. They all knew that if they had to rely on NASA as its only customer, you know, that's tough.
All right, so I see a question back here. Right here, yeah.
Thank you very much for your words, Administrator. My name is Juan Francisco Gutierrez. I'm from the Embassy of Argentina. NASA and our Commission of Space Activities have had a long-standing and fruitful bilateral cooperation, but I would like to know how can a Latin American country improve or further strengthen the bilateral cooperation? Thank you very much.
You did say Argentina, right?
Yes.
We had an incredible, I mean, one of the things about which I am the most proud, some of my folk from international relations are smiling because one of my early trips, in fact, my first trip to South America as the NASA administrator, we went to Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and back to Costa Rica. And in Argentina, we went to celebrate the success of a mission called Aquarius, SAC-D, where the U.S. and Argentina, and actually Brazil had done some of the testing, but Argentina and the U.S. were the prime partners. And Aquarius, during its lifetime, successfully mapped every piece, if you want to say piece, every inch of the surfaces of the ocean. I call it one ocean, but I'll humor you all and say oceans of the world. And we had an opportunity to go down with a young female scientist who was one of the key scientists on the mission, and she brought along a chart. It was the first chart produced of salinity in the oceans of the world, and we presented it then to then President de Kirchner. And I was mesmerized. She's not a scientist. She realized the significance of that particular mission and what it had done. There, going before the entire world, the nation of Argentina was about to contribute something that lots of other people had thought about, nobody had ever done. And I mean, she just about climbed on the table, admiring this chart of the oceans of the world that had come from an Argentine satellite with the ocean salinity, I mean, like to a teaspoon in every ocean of the world. So it's that kind of stuff that takes what we call non-traditional partners, countries that would not normally have a full-fledged space program. Argentina is fortunate to have one. Brazil, Colombia. We were recently in Colombia, Purdue. Purdue is not a foreign country. I got it. For those of you who are Purdue alums, I got that. But we went to Peru, Colombia, Brazil, and Argentina again, and it is going, and we're about to go back to Africa because there with the U.S. Agency for International Development, we have a program called Surveyor that provides earth science data now to 25 East African nations, and the West Africans wanted their own, so we're going to go hopefully this summer and we'll open another hub with the U.S. Agency for International Development in an environmental center that will provide earth science data to farmers, to disaster managers and disaster planners to help them help their people. And that's the kind of stuff that lets you drive home at night smiling, looking. I live down in Mount Vernon. I can drive along the river going home on the parkway. I'm a happy camper. And every night, I can wake up in the morning and say, this is going to be a bad day. And it never does. It never ends up being a bad day. My worst days are good days because at the end of the day, I go home knowing we've done something for somebody somewhere in the world.
And so we're running out of time here. I want to ask you one final question. So you've been at the helm at NASA for 7 years now. Looking back on your time, can you tell us what have you learned from your experiences? And
I need more than the rest of the time we have here.
Top one or two things. And what advice do you have for the next administration?
Let me not say what I've learned, but one thing that I reaffirmed, I strongly reaffirmed my belief that I had been taught by my parents, as a midshipman at the Naval Academy, as a young officer in the Marine Corps, the critical importance of people. Everybody thinks of us as a technical organization. We're not. We do a lot of technical stuff. We are the world's foremost organization of people. We are as good as we are because we have people who come to work every single day around the world focused on making life better for people on Earth. And they do an incredible job of doing that. And it makes you feel really good to know that you have employees who feel good about themselves because they recognize the fact that they're doing something good for humanity in spite of everything else that's going on this planet right now. So that was a reaffirmation. It wasn't anything I learned. I learned a lot about dealing in this town, and much of it I'll purge, when I walk away from my desk. For the next administration, I would say to any incoming administration, listen before you act. Flying the space shuttle, one of the things we learned was no matter how bad things got, there was almost never a time that you had to do something right now. Even flying in high-performance airplanes as a test pilot in the Marine Corps, every once in a while something happens and you need to do something right now. But frequently, if you do something right now without thinking about it or without listening or consulting other people, it turns out to be a really bad thing. And you know, I learned that lesson in the simulator on my first flight as a rookie wanting to impress my crew. When sitting in the pilot seat, you work all the other systems except flying the vehicle. And we had an electrical failure one day, and I dreaded it. I'm supposed to be an electrical scientist, but I dreaded electrical failures because it was always confusing. And I had a failure, and I looked over, and I said, okay, I'm going to really impress my crew here. And I said, okay, that's an essential bus 1BC failure. So, you know, in that case, you shut down the bad electrical bus so that it doesn't short into the rest of the system and kill the crew. Without conferring with anybody else, wanting to impress my crew, the trusty pilot, Charlie Bolden, reached over and poof, shut off what I thought was the problem. Well, guess what? That was a good bus. It was tricky, and I had misdiagnosed it. As soon as I did that, I heard the absence of sound. This is a simulator, so this is good. And it was a sound that went kind of like, and it was the sound of the second main engine on the shuttle going down. We had 2 left of the 3. The first one had gone out when we had the first electrical failure, and I shut down the wrong electrical bus. And as the simulator flailed around and everything, and then came to a sudden stop, Hoot Gibson, who was my commander and my role model, Hoot looked over at me and he said, "Charles?" And like my mom, when I was growing up saying Charles Frank, I knew I was in trouble. I said, "Yes, Hoot." He said, "Did I ever teach you Hoot's Law?" I said, "No, Hoot, you did not." "What is it?" He said, "No matter how bad things get, you can always make them worse." And from that moment on, I recognized the fact that no matter what you're doing, take a moment, listen to what other people have to say, and then, you know, decide what it is you're going to do. So that would be my one piece of advice, is listen.
Well, that sounds like good advice for the next administration.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you for coming. It's such a pleasure to have you. And thank you all.